Now it's my pleasure to introduce Michaela Delmark-Blum from Gothenburg. She's associate professor there, and she is a board member of the International Network on Esophageal Atresia, and she is a member of the EAT Medical Advisory Committee. Welcome, Michaela.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, first I want to thank the speakers, Melanie, Martin and Ben, for great presentations. I want to thank Anke Wiedemann and Kex for this invitation. And Graham, thank you for your introduction. So this is an update on patient-reported outcomes in esophageal atresia, EA. It is a wish from my side to raise a holistic view on these patients' needs in order to guide a holistic caring approach during the patient journey. So to start with, why patient-reported outcomes? Well, among other outcomes, these outcomes should reflect what matters to the patients. By turning to the people with the lived experience after disease and treatment, by trying to listen and systematically looking into their point of view, we can learn more. We can learn more about the disease and treatment, how it takes expression, and which impact it has in their everyday life. This knowledge is needed to provide them a patient-centered care and treatment where healthcare is adapted to the needs that are important for children and adults with repair of EA. Furthermore, patient-reported outcomes are closely linked to the concept of health. It regards any report of the status of a patient's health condition that comes directly from the patient. In children, parents are also recognized as an important source of information regarding their child's health. Health, in turn, is a holistic concept as defined by the World Health Organization. It is not only the absence of disease or infirmity, it's a complete state of physical, mental, and social well-being. Hence the title of this presentation and the perspective of this presentation. When we further advance this concept, we can speak about health-related quality of life, which, as you can see on this slide, capture this multidimensional perspective, and it underlines the individual's perceived impact of the disease and treatment. What is important when trying to understand health-related quality of life outcomes in patients with repair of EA is that the findings reflect the methodologies used. Sometimes it goes back to the questions we actually ask the patients. And as a part of that, we can also speak about different measurement approaches. On this slide, you can see 3 different measurement approaches. And the broadest approach is the generic approach. It includes questionnaires that ask questions applicable to people independent of their health status, and that makes it possible to compare such outcomes between patient groups and healthy norms. While the most narrow approach is the disease-specific measurement approach, including questionnaires that are sensitive to capture issues that are important for a specific disease or condition. And in the field of EA, the disease-specific questionnaires were developed in the recent years, so this will of course affect the level of knowledge we have available today. In order to provide a holistic view, I will go through the following questions. First, is health-related quality of life impaired in children or adults with repair of EA as compared to healthy or general norms? What happens when we turn to these children and adults? What do they tell us are important for their health-related quality of life? And is there a profile of affected areas in life among them? What would then my take-home message be? So let's start with the first research question. On this slide, you can see that there are 39 studies available which have assessed health-related quality of life in children with repair of EA. The most commonly used questionnaire is the generic questionnaire PEDSQL generic core scales. So in order to address this first question, we will take a closer look at these findings. First, you can see what PEDSQL generic core scale measures, that there are 4 different health functioning domains and an overall estimate of health-related quality of life. then I will show you what happens when we break the number of studies down, that out of 20 articles, a considerably less number of studies have actually compared these outcomes with a healthy or general norm population. But based on available data, it seems like children with repair of EA have impaired health-related quality of life in one of these functioning domains or overall as compared to healthy norms. But this is according to parent reports, and less is known about the children's point of view. And as you can see in the number of articles, this research question has not yet been adequately addressed. In adulthood, you can see that the number of studies are considerably less than that in children. Only 12 studies have reported health-related quality of life in adults with repair of EA. Among them, 6 have used the generic health-related quality of life questionnaire SF36. So in order to try and answer this second research question, we will take a look at these findings. And first, you can see what SF36 measures, that there are 2 main component summary scores, each of which are built up by 4 different subscales. And you will also see that based on the available data, there is generally no support for impaired health-related quality of life in adults with repair of EA as compared to healthy references and using SF36. But I must point out that this field is not appropriately investigated. Of all studies, 70% of them are between 10 and 30 years old, which tells us that these findings do not fairly reflect current survivor groups reaching adulthood. And there is also limited geographic spread among the conducted studies. So if we turn to these children and adults with repair of EA, what do they tell us about their health-related quality of life? The first effort to turn to children with repair of EA through focus groups was made within a Swedish and German setting. And based on thousands of different reported experiences regarding these children's health-related quality of life, the following items and domains were derived and validated. And today they have been validated for content in 16 different countries. And it reveals that eating forms part of these children's health-related quality of life from the early beginning of the patient journey. Physical health aspects, including possible impact of respiratory morbidity and related treatment aspects, are relevant for the young children, whereas with increased child age, social aspects also become increasingly important. And in the questionnaire version for children aged 8 to 18, there is an additional domain for body perception, asking about the perception of surgical scars. There is today also a quality of life questionnaire for adults with repair of EA, developed by Ten Cate et al. In the Netherlands, similarly using focus groups to derive items. And what is interesting is that when you take a look at the content, even though it's named a little bit different, there seem to be some shared commonalities between children and adults, like eating and drinking, esophageal and respiratory complaints, medication, relationship, and appearance. But these shared commonalities would be, in detail, would be an emerging field of study. But it is interesting to ask if there is a profile of affected areas among children and adults with repair of EA. Based on available data in the literature, I have tried to synthesize this into the 5 following domains, and this takes the perspective of patient-reported outcome research. You will notice that research in children are often more extensive than that in adults. You will also notice that I will bring quotes from interview studies and focus group studies into this presentation to exemplify the findings and also to reinforce the patient voice into this presentation. Eating. Eating has been described by children and adults born with esophageal atresia to impact their everyday life. But this is not only about the ability to eat oral feeds or not. This is a more complex experience, including physical, emotional, and social experiences. As you can see exemplified in the following quotes, a child told us that sometimes I get lonely during lunch break in school because my friends eat much faster than I do. And an adult who told that choking and gurgling in public is horrifying for me and everyone watching. Looking at the multidimensional concept of eating and quality of life on statistical level, we have identified subgroups in our Swedish and German studies who risk poorer quality of life in relation to eating. In child ages 2 to 7, children with a gastrostomy insertion risk poorer quality of life in relation to eating. In child age 8 to 17, children with no primary anastomosis who were prematurely born and who needed one or more esophageal dilatations risked poorer quality of life in relation to eating. And in both age groups, the presence of difficulty swallowing food, heartburn, and vomiting the past month explained a substantial variation in the eating scores between 43 and 58%, meaning that these children had worse quality of life in relation to eating. Here is a study from the US reporting on adults with repair of EA. For example, it described that 82% of the adults reported some form of swallowing difficulty and only 30% reported never having difficulty, discomfort, or pressure when swallowing hard food. And swallowing difficulties were associated with worse generic health-related quality of life. We know today also that eating and feeding difficulties in EA do not only affect the patient, him or herself, but also the parents and caregivers. Recent qualitative studies where parents have been asked revealed that parents' experiences within this context are related to fear, loss, trauma, worry, isolation, and care needs. In Swedish and German studies, we have found that children with repair of EA who have feeding difficulties also have worse family functioning. Another recent study from the Netherlands showed that choking incidents in childhood may leave traumatic prints among caregivers that stay with them into their children's adulthood. So, what does it tell us? It tells us, or it proposes us, to have a prominent focus on eating as a multidimensional concept. From the early start of the patient journey, recognizing that it has an impact or may have an impact on the patient as well as the parents and the family. The second area I would like to speak about concerns body perception and appearance, mainly due to surgical scars. As you can see exemplified in these quotes, there seems to be individuals who perceive a negative impact by the surgical scars, but there also seems to be individuals who create meaningfulness and experience a positive impact by the surgical scars. So, for example, a child told that I think about it a lot, that it doesn't look normal to have a scar like I have. And another child told, I carry my scars with pride, and the similar sense is reported among adults. On statistical level, using data from 10 different countries and 84 reports from children, we can see that within a recall period of 1 month, around slightly less than half experienced a negative impact by the surgical scars. And this included, for example, being unhappy with the way they look because of the scars, feeling awkward when the scars were visible to others, being careful what they wear because of the scars, feeling different because of the scars, and getting tired of people asking about the scars. It also shows that slightly more than half, and sometimes even 3/4, did not experience a negative impact with regard to these aspects. A recent Chinese study using the EA-QoL questionnaire showed favorable outcomes for thoracoscopic repair with regard to quality of life in the domain body perception, while in the other direction, associated anomalies and an increased number of digestive symptoms explain worse quality of life in relation to body perception. And when you go through the data, you can see that this seems to be a more diseased subgroup who underwent more surgical procedures. There are 2 studies in adults with repair of EA describing an adult-reported impact by a disfigured or winged scapula or surgical scars ranging from 9 to 50%. The third area I would like to mention regard mental health, challenges and difficulties. And as you can see on this slide, there are quite similar quotes made by both children and adults. A child told that it feels very emotional and sad when I think about that I was born with EA and all the things that I have been through. And an adult who said that the emotional effect of EA has been enormous. The trauma relates more to medical events from my childhood. In a meta-analysis I've conducted as a part of a systematic review, I've included different studies evaluating mental health difficulties in children with repair of EA. And as you can see on this slide, the pooled estimate on the prevalence shows that almost 1 out of 3 children with repair of EAs reported elevated levels of mental health difficulties by their parents. Recent qualitative studies have described anxiety, psychological and trauma in adults with repair of EA, but rarely using prevalence estimates. These are only available for depression and mental health problems without further definition. But a recent Swedish registry study showed a higher risk of autism spectrum disorders compared to controls. The fourth area concerns the social aspects of life, the relationships, interaction, and participation. And as due to EA, several experiences from children and adults also seem to be similar. They have told that they receive comments from others regarding some of their symptoms, about their surgical scars and condition, sometimes with the need to explain them to others, social withdrawal and avoidance, and in children also experience of social exclusion. Around a third of children have been reported to have problems with peer relationships, and several studies from different parts of the world have showed reduced school functioning compared to healthy or general norms. In Swedish studies, we have observed between 25 and 36% being reported to have a school absence corresponding to more than 12 times a year or more. This was related to young child age and persistent respiratory symptoms. It is not known today how these aspects relate to each other, but this would be an important and emerging field of study. In adults, social withdrawal and absence from school and work have been reported, but we don't know today to what extent or if this is a major problem or not. And then the last area I would like to go through concern what most of us know, that these children and adults experience or risk experience in digestive, feeding, and respiratory symptoms. Now, the interesting thing is from the perspective of patient-reported outcome research, this has been evaluated in different ways using unvalidated assessments, sometimes or quite often on categorical level, meaning that we ask a patient if they had a symptom the past month or not. But even so, even on categorical level, it is interesting when you go through the health-related quality of life literature that across studies, symptom experience seem to be related to quality of life. But if we think about it, in real life, a symptom experience is not categorical. And this agrees with a conceptual model created by Armstrong that there is indeed several components of the symptom experience, such as frequency, intensity, distress, and meaning. And symptoms, they often occur together with other symptoms, and this has not been taken into account in previous patient-reported outcome research in EA, even though this may be a main contributor to their quality of life. That are part of the reasons why I think that creating patient-reported outcome measurements targeting symptom burden in EA for use in clinical practice where we can monitor and treat patients and in research would be one way to help improve the health experience and health-related quality of life, and to reinforce the patient perspective on the possible disease-specific consequences and morbidities that they may encounter. And that forms part of the reasons why Dr. Benjamin Zendejas from Boston Children's Hospital, EAT, and I have started a project to develop patient-reported outcome and experience measurement focusing on symptom burden in children and adults with repair of EA. So with regard to that and this presentation, what is my take-home message? So there is enough data today to say that people with repair of EA, they may experience physical, mental, and social disease-specific impact. But we don't know its duration, how it changes over time, or for certain if health-related quality of life is impaired compared to healthy or general norms. But I don't think we should focus only on health-related quality of life is affected, but rather in what way, for whom, and to what extent. Because there seems to be thematic areas in life affected in subgroups, meaning that all patients are not affected. When we meet patients in clinical care, for one individual, they may be impacted in all domains, another in none, and a third in 2 of them. Looking at this research field and what has happened the past 10-15 years, some puzzle pieces have started to come together, but as you can see, this field is quite still premature and there is so much more to do. And one of the focuses should be to explore and understand more about the symptom burden experiences and to have valid and reliable tools measuring these outcomes in clinical care and research. So in my future outlook, I hope that we as a community will continue coming together, collect evidence, and create care and treatment strategies that takes this holistic perspective into account. With that, I would like to thank you all for listening and be happy to participate in a discussion. And I would like to remind you about the Convention on the Rights of the Child. As have been said by previous speakers, there is so much possibilities working with children. There is so much possibilities with regard to prevention if we do the right thing from the very beginning of the patient journey. Every child has the right to the best possible health, and every child has the right to express their views, feelings, and wishes in all matters affecting them, and to be taken seriously. And that is why patient-reported outcome research is so important, and this applies also to children with repair of EA. Thank you.